The folder where I kept my good earrings had been sitting on my dresser for 3 weeks. I'd bought them for the occasion. Small pearl drops, nothing extravagant. Just something that said I made an effort. The morning of my daughter's big day, I clipped them on, smoothed my navy blazer in the mirror, and told myself this was going to be fine. I was wrong. The event coordinator, a young woman in a headset who clearly had somewhere more important to be, met me at the entrance of the Hargrove Convention Center and checked her clipboard twice before finding my name. Not near the front, not at the family table. She walked me to a row of chairs along the back wall, behind the catering station, and said, "We have you here, ma'am." Then she was gone before I could say a word. I stood there for a moment. The ballroom was gorgeous. Crystal centerpieces, spotlights aimed at a stage draped in the company's colors, teal and gold. 200 people filling in around circular tables with little name cards and gift bags. Somewhere near the front, I could see my daughter Claire moving through the crowd in her cream blazer, laughing, shaking hands, being exactly who she'd always wanted to be. She didn't look back. I sat down. I put my purse in my lap. I told myself it was probably just a mix-up with the seating chart. It was not a mix-up. I should explain what this event was. Claire had co-founded a financial consulting firm, Hargrove Capital Partners, with her husband, a man named Stuart, whose family had money going back 3 generations. This was their grand launch, the celebration of their first year in business, and they'd invited clients, investors, city council members, a state senator. It was, by any measure, the biggest night of Claire's professional life. She had called me 6 weeks before and said, "Mom, you have to be there." It would mean so much, so I drove 4 hours from Macon to Atlanta. I booked a hotel room I couldn't really afford. I bought the earrings. What Claire had not told me, what I would only piece together later from things I overheard and things her assistant let slip, was that Stuart's mother, Lorraine, had decided I was a liability. Lorraine had grown up in Buckhead and had opinions about everything, including the kind of people who belonged in certain rooms. I was a retired school librarian from a small town. My car had 140,000 miles on it. I'd raised Claire alone after her father left when she was 9, working 2 jobs for most of her childhood. None of that, apparently, was the right kind of story for a room full of investors. "Your mother has a certain presentation," Lorraine had apparently told Claire. "Tonight needs to be polished." And Claire had agreed. Or at least she hadn't disagreed, which is its own kind of answer. I sat in the back row and watched the room fill up. A woman beside me turned out to be a delivery coordinator waiting on a late floral arrangement. We smiled at each other politely. When a waiter came by with glasses of sparkling water, he skipped our row entirely. We weren't on his section map. I thought about leaving. I genuinely did. I thought about getting up, walking to the parking garage, driving to my hotel, and ordering room service, and not telling anyone I'd gone. I had done harder things than that. I'd sat in a hospital waiting room alone for 6 hours when my mother had her stroke. I'd told Claire her father wasn't coming back when she was 9, in our kitchen with a bowl of macaroni going cold on the table. I knew how to sit with hard things. But I stayed, partly stubbornness, partly because some part of me still believed Claire would see me and come over, that she would walk back and say, "Mom, what are you doing back here? Come sit with me." She didn't. The program started. Claire took the stage and spoke beautifully. She always had, even as a little girl giving book reports, and the room applauded and she glowed. Stuart said a few words. Lorraine was seated front and center in a cream-colored suit, beaming like she'd built the company herself. I watched my daughter from behind a catering cart. It was somewhere during the second speaker that the man sat down beside me. I hadn't noticed him approach. The chair to my left had been empty, and then it wasn't. He was perhaps a few years older than me, mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a dark charcoal suit that was very clearly not off the rack. He didn't have a gift bag. He didn't have a name card. He just sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at the stage with calm, unhurried attention. After a moment, he said quietly, "You're not a florist." I looked at him. "Excuse me? The woman on the other side of you has a delivery manifest in her bag. You don't." He had a slight Virginia accent, measured and warm. "Which means you're here for a different reason." "I'm the mother of one of the founders," I said. I don't know why I felt the need to explain myself, but I did. He nodded slowly. "Ah." That one syllable carried more understanding than anything else said to me that evening. We sat quietly for a moment. On the stage, someone was presenting a projected graph of Q1 revenue growth. "I'm Lionel," he said. "Dottie," I told him, short for Dorothy. Nobody had called me Dorothy since my mother. "Are you enjoying yourself, Dottie?" I looked at him. He had kind eyes, the kind that have seen enough of life to not be easily surprised by it. I thought about saying, "Yes, of course, the way you do." Instead, I said, "Not particularly." He nodded again. "Would you like to?" I wasn't sure what he meant. Before I could ask, he stood up, offered me his arm. Actually offered me his arm, like we were at a garden party in 1955, and said, "I believe there are open seats closer to the stage. Come with me." I can't just. Why not? I didn't have an answer for that. So I took his arm. What happened next, I still think about, because it was so quiet and so effective. Lionel did not make a scene. He simply walked me to a table near the front, a table with 2 empty seats, clearly reserved, and pulled out my chair and sat beside me. A waiter appeared immediately. Water, then wine, then a plate of hors d'oeuvres I hadn't known existed from the back of the room. From 2 tables away, I saw Lorraine's eyes land on us. Her smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Claire saw us during the applause break between speakers. I watched her face go through 3 emotions in about 4 seconds. The first was confusion. The second was something I can only describe as calculation. And the third, the one she settled on as she began walking toward our table, was a bright, practiced smile. "Mom," she said, "there you are. I was looking for you." She had not been looking for me. And this is, she looked at Lionel with that particular attention people give to someone they haven't placed yet but think they should have. Lionel stood and shook her hand. "Lionel Beaumont, congratulations on your launch, Claire. Your firm's Q1 numbers were impressive. I read the summary before I came this evening." Claire's smile went from practice to genuinely uncertain. "Thank you. Are you here as someone's guest?" "I'm here as your mother's," Lionel said simply, and sat back down. I watched my daughter's face do something complicated. Then she excused herself and went to find Stuart. Lionel turned back to the stage as if nothing had happened. He picked up his wineglass. "You have a very accomplished daughter," he said. "I know," I said. "I made her." He smiled at that. It was the first real smile I'd seen all evening. Here is what I did not know about Lionel Beaumont. He was the founder of Beaumont Infrastructure Group, a private equity firm based in Richmond that had recently been looking to diversify into financial consulting. He had not been invited to the launch. He had come as a favor to a colleague who couldn't attend, to simply observe the firm and see if it was worth a conversation. He later told me he had been planning to leave after the first speaker. He stayed until the end. What I also didn't know, but would learn over the following 20 minutes, while Stuart and Claire consulted in a corner and Lorraine watched our table from across the room. Lorraine knew exactly who Lionel Beaumont was. She had, in fact, spent considerable energy trying to get him in a room with Stuart for the past 8 months. He had never returned her calls. I didn't know any of this. I just knew that someone had given me a chair near the front of the room and was talking to me like I was a person worth talking to. Lorraine came to our table during the cocktail portion. She wore the approach of someone who has decided to be magnanimous, which is always the most exhausting kind of approach. "Lionel Beaumont," she said with a laugh like we were old friends. "I had no idea you'd be here tonight. What a wonderful surprise." "Lorraine." He nodded. I've been hoping to connect you with Stuart, my son, the co-founder. I think you two would have so much to discuss. She gestured vaguely in Stuart's direction. Unsure, Lionel said pleasantly. Lorraine's gaze drifted to me with the particular blankness people use when they don't want to acknowledge someone directly. And you've met Claire's mother? I have, Lionel said. Dorothy is wonderful company. We've been having a lovely conversation. Lorraine smiled. Of course. Well, I do hope we can pull you away at some point, too. I'll be honest with you, Lionel said. He set down his wine glass. His voice was still perfectly polite. The tone of a man who has had 1,000 meetings and knows exactly how to control one. I tend to do business with people based on what I observe about their character. Tonight, what I observed first was that a woman who drove 4 hours to celebrate her daughter's accomplishment was seated behind the catering station. He picked up his wine again. I'll find my own way to Stuart when I'm ready. Lorraine's smile didn't disappear. People like Lorraine have trained their smiles too well for that. But she left. I looked at Lionel. I said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know." Claire came to find me an hour later as the formal program was wrapping up. The room had loosened into clusters of conversation, and I was standing near the windows talking with a woman who turned out to be a county commissioner and had wonderful stories about her own mother. Claire pulled me gently aside. "Mom," she said it quietly with that specific tone that tries to land somewhere between authority and apology. "I'm sorry about the seating. There was a miscommunication." I looked at my daughter. She's 41 years old. She has her father's coloring and my stubbornness and a very expensive haircut. I have loved her since before I ever saw her face, and I will love her until I stop breathing, and none of that had anything to do with what I said next. "Claire," I said, "there was no miscommunication. We both know that." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I drove 4 hours," I said. "I'm your mother." And I sat behind a catering cart. I kept my voice level. This was not the place for a scene, and I am not a scene kind of person. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen. It's just, tonight was important, and Stuart's family is. I know who Stuart's family is, I said. The question is whether you know who I am. She didn't answer. Her eyes went bright, and I could tell she was close to crying, and I almost let it go. But I'd spent 63 years letting things go for other people's comfort, and I had decided somewhere between the back row and the front table that I was done with that. "I love you," I said. "I'm going back to talk to Patricia, the commissioner. She's lovely, and we can have a proper conversation when you're ready to have it. Not here, not tonight, but soon." I walked away first. That was new. Lionel and I exchanged numbers that evening in the lobby while I was waiting for my car from the valet. He said he was in Macon twice a month on business. He had a small logistics client there, and that if I was ever free for dinner, he'd appreciate the company of someone who knew how to sit through a difficult evening with their dignity intact. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for about 6 hours, and then texted him the next morning. What happened with Claire and Stuart and the firm unfolded over the next 2 months, and I was mostly on the periphery of it, which is how I preferred it. Lionel did eventually meet with Stuart, once, briefly, over lunch. He told me afterward that the numbers were solid, but that the firm had some structural issues he wasn't comfortable with, and he passed. This was a business decision that had nothing to do with me, and I want to be clear about that. Lionel is not the kind of man who would sabotage a business to prove a point. He didn't need to. What mattered was what Claire heard through the industry grapevine, that Beaumont Infrastructure had passed on Hargrove Capital Partners, and that Lionel Beaumont had been observed that evening sitting with Claire's mother at the front table, and that Lorraine's attempt to approach him had not gone well. In certain Atlanta financial circles, perception shapes everything. The story that traveled was not the one Lorraine had wanted told. Lorraine called me. This was perhaps the most surprising development. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of repotting a fern, and she said, after a long pause, that she hoped I hadn't taken the seating arrangement personally, and that she had always admired my dedication to Claire's upbringing, and that she hoped we could move forward with a fresh understanding. I let her finish. Then I said, "Lorraine, I appreciate the call. But you and I both know what that evening was. I don't hold grudges. It's genuinely too much work at my age. But I also don't pretend. So let's just be honest with each other going forward." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's fair." It was the most real conversation we'd ever had. Claire and I met for lunch 3 weeks later at a place she chose in Midtown that was quieter than her usual spots. She came in looking like she hadn't been sleeping well, which she confirmed immediately. She sat down and said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't mean the seating. I mean all of it. The fact that I let it happen." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "I know what you sacrificed," she said. "I know what those years were. I don't know when I started letting other people's opinions matter more than—" She stopped. "Than me?" I offered. "Than everything I actually know to be true." We sat with that for a moment. I told her that I wasn't interested in a prolonged conversation about fault, that I was interested in a different kind of relationship going forward, one where I didn't need to earn my seat in her life based on how I reflected on her, one where she called me because she wanted to, not because it was the correct thing to do. She said that sounded like something she could work toward. I told her that was enough for now. We ordered the soup. She told me about a problem with one of their junior analysts. I told her about the fern and about the county commissioner I'd stayed in touch with, who was starting a literacy initiative and had asked if I'd consult on the library program design. Claire said, "Mom, that's perfect for you," and meant it the way she used to when she was 12. And I'd come home with a new idea and her whole face would open. That's the face I've been holding on to. Lionel and I had that dinner in Macon in October. He brought flowers, not roses, which would have been too much, but a small bunch of sunflowers from a farmer's market stand. We went to a place on Cherry Street that does good Southern food, and we talked for 3 hours about books and about his late wife and about what I missed most about working in the school library. He told me he still felt her absence in the house on Sunday mornings. I told him I understood that particular kind of quiet. We've had 7 dinners since. I still have the pearl earrings on my dresser. I've worn them to 3 of those dinners. I am not telling this story because everything was fixed. Claire and I are still figuring out what we want our relationship to look like. There are things she did that I will not pretend were small. There are things I probably let go on too long without saying clearly enough that they hurt me. That's a conversation that lives over multiple lunches, not one afternoon. And I am not telling this story to make Lorraine a villain, exactly. Lorraine is a woman who grew up believing that certain things had value and other things did not. And that belief was never seriously challenged until a Tuesday phone call with a retired librarian in Georgia. I'm telling this story because of what happened in that moment when I took Lionel's arm and walked from the back of the room to the front. Because it was not Lionel who moved me. Not really. I moved myself. I just finally decided that the distance between where I was sitting and where I deserved to sit was not someone else's to close. 63 years old. 4-hour drive. Pearl earrings. Sometimes that's what it takes to find out where you actually belong. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the quiet, practical kind of thinking you do when you're repotting a fern on a Tuesday afternoon and your phone rings and it's someone who treated you like furniture 6 weeks ago, now speaking carefully, choosing her words. What Lorraine did that evening at the Hargrove Convention Center was not unusual. People like her have been making decisions like that for a long time, and most of the time, those decisions go unchallenged because the person on the receiving end, someone like me, decides it isn't worth the fight. I've made that calculation more times than I can count. Swallowed the discomfort, smoothed my blazer, told myself it didn't matter. The thing is, it accumulates. Every time you decide your dignity is negotiable, you teach the people around you that it is. That's not a moral judgment. It's just cause and effect. Claire didn't arrive at that evening fully formed. She was shaped over years by a mother who made herself small when the room got uncomfortable. I'm not blaming myself for what she did, but I'm honest enough to see my own part in the pattern. What changed that night wasn't Lionel. He was kind, and his presence mattered. But the real change happened when I decided to take his arm. Nobody made me do that. I could have stayed in that chair and waited for Claire to come find me, and she might have, eventually, and I would have accepted whatever partial acknowledgement she offered. I've done it before. Instead, I stood up, and that one decision, so small, physically, just rising from a chair, turned out to be the thing everything else flowed from. That's how it usually works, I think. The consequential moments rarely announce themselves. They just ask quietly whether you're going to stay seated or not. What I want to say about intelligence is this. Wisdom isn't knowing the right answer in advance. It's being honest enough to see a situation clearly when you're standing in the middle of it. I saw clearly that evening. I saw the catering cart. I saw Lorraine's face when she looked at me. I saw Claire not look at me at all. I could have explained all of that away. I had the words ready. I'd used them before, but I chose not to. That choice, that refusal to soften what was plainly true, was the most intelligent thing I did all night. And the courage part, the part about getting up and walking to a better seat, that wasn't bravery in any dramatic sense. It was just tired. Tired of performing gratitude for being included at all. Tired of arranging myself around other people's comfort. 63 years is a long time to practice smallness. At some point, the practice stops working because you've seen too much, lived too much, and you know too well what it costs. Claire and I are still working things out. That's honest. There isn't a clean ending where everything is repaired and everyone learned their lesson and we go forward changed. Life doesn't run on that kind of schedule. What there is, a lunch in Midtown where she said she was sorry and meant it, and I believed her, and we ordered soup, and she looked at me the way she used to when she was 12. That's enough to build from. The pearl earrings are still on my dresser. I've worn them 7 times since that evening, and not once to sit in the back of any room.